California News, I'm Jeff Scott.
Are you ready for a new experience? To see life from another point of view? New hope, new expression, new joy. This is your radio hour. Welcome to Viewpoint with Father John.
And welcome, friends. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. And as a reminder, you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Just look for Viewpoint with Father John. Also, if you miss a show, you can go to YouTube and catch all the last 3 years of shows. Just in the search bar, put Viewpoint with Father John, KCAA, and it'll be right there. And be sure to subscribe. It helps us greatly. And I am on Twitter, believe it or not. I don't know how healthy that is, but it's at Father John Reed. That's R-E-I-D, the proper Irish. You know, there's only two kinds of people in the world, Irish and those that wish they were. And so you can follow me on Twitter as well, but keep it clean. All of God's children are endowed with extraordinary purpose and ability. I'm on a quest to help as many as possible in fully realizing their divinely inspired potential. Disposing a false narrative and embracing genuineness inspires clarity of purpose. My role is to help overcome self-imposed limitations in realizing one's spiritual potential. And folks, as we do each week, I want to tell you about the best pharmacy in Southern California. That's Claremont Pharmacy. And where you believe it or not, that's located in Claremont. Yeah, on the corner of Indian Hill and Arrow Highway. Dr. Nikki Ho is the proprietor of this establishment, and they handle all my pharmaceutical needs. I'll tell you what, you're not just a number there, you're a person, and you'll love the staff because each person is dealt with dignity. For them, dignity is not a sales pitch. It's really how they treat people. And since I sent all my prescriptions over there, I have always been well cared for. And you know, when you're diabetic, that's kind of important. And so stop by there and tell them that Father John said hi. And if you're looking for a haircut, if you're wondering why I look so beautiful tonight, I went to Uppercuts. Yes, they cut my hair. Sam is my barber over there. They're on 681 East Foothill Boulevard in Pomona, California. Now, Sam's the short one. He doesn't like to be told that. He's vertically challenged. But he'll stand on a phone book to cut your hair. He's a good guy. But if you want someone taller, you have Leo and the rest. And Sam just cut my hair a couple days ago, and he said if I keep up these jokes, he's going to get the last laugh on my haircut. And also, as you know, I like to tell you about my friend Glenn Kirshner. And this is not a paid advertisement. This is just, Glenn's a friend of mine, and I share what he does because I really believe in him. He has Justice Matters. He was a federal prosecutor for 30 years and an Army JAG lawyer, a prosecutor for 6.5 years. But he tells you like it is. So if you have some questions about what's going on with the legal stuff, go over to Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner. You'll really be glad you did. You'll find that it's really straight talk. He doesn't push an agenda. So those are some of the stuff going on in the area right now. And I'm really thrilled that tonight we have a great guest. It's a Jill A. Johnson Young. She's at LCSW. She wanted to see if I can get that whole name out there without stumbling too much. She's over here. She's evaluating if I need to be 5150'd or not. She says I'm only 2 letters in. But she's a local, state, national, and international speaker on grief and loss and dementia. She does online training for therapists and telehealth for therapists. Yeah, I'm sorry. She's the CEO and co-owner of Central Counseling Services. Now, there's a whole list of books that she has. Now, we're going to put one of them up on the screen, but here's a whole list of them, and I suspect that we'll have a competition who could read the most of them first. But Own Your Path Through Grief, Someone I Love Just Died, What Happens Now? Someone I Love Is Sick, What Happens Now? My Pet Is Sick, It's Time to Say Goodbye. Public speaking, she does grief and loss and dementia. And she has a brand new book that just came out in March, I believe. And it's the photo is on the screen for those looking on YouTube. It's The Rebellious Widow, A Practical Guide to Love and Life and Loss. Jill, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's so nice to be here.
Glad to have you here. And I've been excited. You came really highly recommended from Marcia and from Steve. And Marcia says Steve gives her a lot of grief. So
Yes, he does.
and, I love you, Steve. But what's true is true. We say anonymity is anonymity, confidentiality is confidentiality, but news is news.
And it needs to be.
It needs to be. So you have a whole work in both grief and also dementia, which is a form of grief in itself as well. We've always called it, when I worked in hospice, the long goodbye. Tell us a little bit about what you have going on.
Well, the dementia work I do, and you're right, it is the long goodbye, but there's so many kinds of dementia that each goodbye is a little bit different. But it is a million little losses, and then there's a lot more losses after the person with dementia has died. So I do a dementia support group in Riverside. It's on the third Saturday of every month. It's free. It's now online because, COVID.
Right.
So now we've got members from the East Coast, a good group from Texas who lost their group when COVID.
Yeah.
So we walked them through the recent ice storm, too.
Oh, wow.
Where they had folks at home with dementia and no power and no heat.
You mean they didn't just tune in from Costa Rica or wherever it was?
Something they should have been there. That's exactly right. Yeah, so I do the dementia stuff because when I was doing hospice, as you did, there were so many people who I'd go into the home and they'd look at me mystified and say, how is it that we're end stage? Dementia isn't supposed to be a terminal illness. Like all the commercials say that, there's going to be a survivor and that you take the memory meds and I'd have to sit down and say, no, it is a terminal illness unto itself, all by itself.
Yes.
And then you look at them and they're just exhausted. And then at the end of life, the rest of the family sort of descends and there's all the judgy, second guessing, why. And the primary caregivers feel like they're just being tossed around in open seas.
Yes, and also some of the medications, some insurance companies will throw you off of because it's expensive. Even though they're not supposed to be able to do it, they find loopholes. And with that, you may have trouble ever having insurance again. Now you have that to worry about on top of everything else.
And we also know that dementia caregivers are the number one free labor group in the entire world.
Yes.
And especially the United States. Other G7 countries have got their act a little more together. They have some amazing programs.
Yes.
In some countries, in Holland, they have dementia villages.
Oh, wow.
Which are amazing, and they have them in England as well. In some places, they have these communities that are fashioned after a traditional community around a green, and the person with dementia and their spouse or caregiver moves in there, but they have like a little pharmacy, a florist, a postal service, so that it mimics real life.
Right.
But the caregiver can leave and go to work or do what they need to do, and the person with dementia is safe, has activities, and it feels normal, not like you're at adult daycare or stuck in a facility.
Right.
Because you're not. You go home at night with your loved one, but there's also staff available if you need help.
Yeah, except for I was playing hide and seek, and everyone kept forgetting to look for me.
That's exactly right. I did that to my children just to see what would happen, which wasn't nice because they came from foster care, and you're not supposed to do that when you're doing all that attachment stuff.
I know I'm going to get some letters on that one.
Me
Folks,
too.
It was a joke. It was a joke. We're talking dementia, so forget it. Yes.
You have to laugh with dementia. You have to laugh with grief.
Well, it's true, and my listeners know that I'm dealing with some dementia. Mm-hmm. And I've been very open about it on Facebook. I've shared some of my experiences that have happened, times I get lost and such, because I thought one of the last services I can do is try to be an open book for other people to let them know this is what I'm experiencing now. And while there's so many different forms of dementia, and it's hard to get a good diagnosis as to which one you have, but at least maybe by sharing these experiences, someone else could say, okay, I'm not the only one going through this.
It's such a service because we know the research says that the average person with dementia waits 2 years to mention to anybody
Right.
that they're having symptoms because they're terrified of it, because we make such a big deal about how terrible dementia is. And it is. Folks, don't hear me otherwise. It is terrible. I lost my second wife to Lewy body dementia, which is
sorry.
one of the most gruesome. It's why Robin Williams took his own life.
Right.
Because the watches were talking. You
Yeah.
know? So there's not a good dementia. There's always a bad dementia. But if we can make it more normal so that those who are experiencing symptoms can raise their hand, particularly with the number of early onset folks we have now.
Well, and a problem we have in the medical community is, besides the patient sharing their experiences, you have so many doctors that are in denial or refuse to make a diagnosis. They don't want to be held responsible for the diagnosis. And they say really, and this is going to sound like I'm joking, but I'm serious. This is really what I find to be a stupid thing that they do. And I've had 3 neurologists do this with me. How long have you been having problems with your memory? And I just looked them in the eye and said, as long as I could remember.
Like, seriously, are you asking me that question?
Yeah, and this one lady, this one tech got really mad at me. I said, I don't know why you're angry. I'm the one dealing with this, and you're asking me how long have I been having problems with my memory. I said, I can't tell you for sure.
Right.
But if you think you're frustrated,
Think about me.
try being in my shoes for a little while, because I went from being someone who was nationally recognized for some of the work I've done to having to wear loafers because I forget how to tie my shoes. And so if you think you're frustrated, you know, and Gabby, you know, what she's had to deal with is, you know, because for so long I would try to hide what's going on
Right.
because I didn't want to accept this is what's happening. And once I did know what it was, I said to her, look, I know you didn't sign up for this. So if you want to go, I understand.
100% of dementia patients I've worked with have said that to their spouses.
Now, she had an interesting response, and she really did. She said, well, first of all, she says, in a very loving way, have you ever stopped to think that maybe that's why I'm here, is to take care of you? And so I said to her, well, are you going to have to stop working or what? She says, no, I have a solution for that. I said, what's that? She says, I'm going to put you in a chair. I'm going to tie you there until I get home from work. I said, what if I have to go to the restroom? She says, not a problem. I'll cut a hole in the bottom, put a bucket under you. No problem.
You know, there's always a MacGyver solution to this stuff.
Yeah. So people think that this look of fear on my face is because I just got off the road. No, I have this fear because I know it's waiting for me when my dementia gets that bad, because I think she meant it.
Well, you do know Sandra Day O'Connor took her husband to work because he had Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, that's right.
He's the reason that she ultimately retired, because she had a caregiver at home and then he got too anxious. And so the caregiver brought him with her to work. And then he couldn't tolerate that anymore. And that's when she retired and went home to Arizona with him. And now she has dementia.
Wow. You know, we used to say if, you know, people want fair in life, it's in Pomona once a year.
Yeah. And don't get on the tilt-a-whirl, especially after eating a churro.
Or everyone will feel the churro.
That's exactly
Yes,
right.
yes.
We'll share it with everyone.
That's right. And that's a communicable disease right there.
There
I'm telling
it is.
You. Well, we're coming up to our first commercial break, and my guest this evening is Jill Johnson-Young. She is a LCSW, and we'll be back in 90 seconds. You're listening to Viewpoint with Father John.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org, www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, Veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
Open for takeout and delivery, El Tapiac Mexican food restaurant in the Tri-City Center of Redlands is back. Their entire family is on hand to serve up their delicious burritos, machaca, chorizo, huevos rancheros, steak and eggs, just part of their mouth-watering great food. Since 1531, people have marveled at the miracle of El Tapiac, and now you can marvel at the great food the Lugo family has been serving up for over 2 decades, nestled quietly in the corner of the Tri-City Center shopping mall next to Burlington Coat Factory. Support them. They can't wait to serve you some of their delectable, authentic, south-of-the-border Mexican fare at great prices, served up with love. Support the area's best-loved Mexican food restaurant in these tough times. Order up a tasty meal on the phone for delivery or takeout for breakfast, lunch, or dinner from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Call 909-307-0017. That's 909-307-0017. Or Google El Tapiac Redlands and treat yourself.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere in the world at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I'm your host, Father John Reed, who for a moment there forgot where I was.
Somewhere at a table.
I know it's an NBC station. I just don't know which one. So anyhow, my guest this evening is Jill Johnson-Young, and she's at LCSW, and she specializes in grief, particularly grief that has to do with dementia and such, and she helps train other people. And we were talking before the break about the difficulty of getting diagnosed and such. Can we talk a little bit about the family process and what's like for them experiencing and watching their loved one make this discovery that there's something wrong?
It's a super tough process, partly because it's so frustrating because you can't find doctors who know what they're doing, and you have doctors who will say things like, you're having some memory loss. That's normal. Maybe you're stressed.
Yeah.
When my wife, who had Lewy body, had her first symptoms, she was fine, and then we were on the lanai in Hawaii, and her coffee cup flew across the lanai about 12 feet. And her hands were shaking because Lewy body has Parkinsonism.
Right.
And
I deal with that.
I said, what is that? And she said, I don't know. And she said, but I woke up this morning and I couldn't tell if it was really morning and where I was. That was the first psychotic moment. That was the onset of Lewy body just that fast. We were about 4 days from going home, so we waited it out. We just relaxed a lot, took the kids places and dropped them off instead of going out and doing some of the activities. Got home, went to see our family doc. He sent us to the ER, where the doctor promptly said, this is stress from having to leave Hawaii.
Yeah.
And I said, are you listening, dude? Because we were in Hawaii when this started. We were relaxed. We were looking at the ocean and the whales. This was not stress. It took us the better part of 2.5 years to get someone to finally say it. They put her through ECT because they said she had depression. And with Lewy body, you don't sleep. You can't go to sleep with anesthesia. So she was awake during the entire ECT procedure, which is electroconvulsive therapy. So while they paralyze you and they ambu bag you, she was awake. And she told them she was, and they said, no, you don't know what you're talking about. You know about the procedure, so you're making that up. With dementia, it becomes this, you don't know what you're talking about, but I also don't believe you have memory loss. And maybe you're just not trying hard enough. And then the family's along for the ride and trying to figure it out. And they're realizing that their loved one at some point can't drive, but their loved one might not even have a diagnosis yet, and they want to drive, and yet it's not safe because at some point the hand-eye coordination just doesn't make it possible to be safe around other people on the road. It's just a complete mess. And so when they finally get the diagnosis, then everybody has to adapt to it and figure out what's going to happen. And there's always someone who says, now we need to talk about placement right away. Yeah. And typically the primary couple says, you know what, we're not doing that. We're talking about how we're going to handle this at home.
Right.
and then everyone else is an expert.
Right.
All these sudden experts who've never had dementia at home, right? And so the
Yeah.
families their heads are just twisting. But as we talked about, like with Sandra Day O'Connor, she had to figure out how to stay on the bench of the Supreme Court with a spouse who couldn't remember if it was daytime or nighttime and why she wasn't home.
Yeah, and I know with my dementia, I struggle. Night times are awful.
They are.
And now the nightmares are happening, and I deal with PTSD to begin with, but it's but some of the things you're talking about, it's funny. We joke quite a bit. The only thing that saved us is our humor. Gabby and I both have great humor, and I often tell doctors, if you want entertainment, watch me make breakfast. You never know when an egg's going to fly across the... and it's happened.
Yes.
I mean, where I'd be making an egg, and suddenly, I don't know why, I just throw it. Mm-hmm. I don't mean to. There was no
It's your brain
conscious
is not connecting properly, and your hand does something without permission.
Yeah, and then I get the tremors and stuff like that. And so one doctor immediately diagnosed me as having dementia, moderate memory loss, and Parkinson. And then the next one says, no, that's coming from something emotional. He really said that. And that's the one I said
I can't
that you
tell you
obviously...
how many times.
Yeah, that's when I said to him that you've obviously been educated beyond your level of intelligence.
Right. It took us 5. It was the 5th guy who gave us the diagnosis. And at that point, I had gotten to the point where I wrote notes about everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And then I would pass them to the nurse at the front desk and say, whoever he is of the day, has to read it before we get back there.
That's what changed
and then
everything.
I would sit behind my wife so that she was looking at him and couldn't look to me for help, because
Right.
that was just painful.
Right.
To see her struggling when they were doing the mini mental status exam. But he could hear what she said, how things were going, and he could see what I had said, how things were going. That was the only way to function.
I totally get that, because the only reason I finally got a referral that I got was because I had typed out, all right, I used the computer. I did my dissertation on a typewriter.
Right.
I'm an old guy. Give me a break. And but I had recorded the progression of the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And when he read that, he was almost speechless. He realized he had really goofed. And that's when I finally got a referral. And I used to say, what the difference is between a doctor and God, right? God knows he's not a doctor.
That's right.
I'll get some letters on that one, But I can say that I'm a PhD. We're the doctors who teach doctors how to be doctors.
My dad was an OChem professor with a PhD.
No kidding.
Yeah, he was the one who decided if you're going to go to med school.
Yeah.
You got that B from him. You weren't going to get into med school.
Oh, I thought you said he was an opiate PhD.
Not even wine. Kind of a shame.
Yeah. I like those kind of feel-good professors.
Right? He's a good old boy from the South.
We do have fun here. We don't get a lot done, but we have fun here.
I think we're getting some stuff done tonight.
I think we are.
Yeah.
I think you are. You'll have to remind me later what it was.
We've got the tape, because I won't remember either.
I have duct tape. And so was this live or Memorex? Anyhow, so this information you're giving is very important. Mm-hmm. And the reason I think it's so important, sometimes people will sympathize or empathize, depending on their abilities, with the patient, what we call the IP in counseling.
Identified patient. Mm-hmm.
But they don't recognize what the family is going through.
The entire family unit does
Right.
dementia together.
Exactly. And each one I found, and correct me if what I'm saying is not really what happens, but my experience has been we're both trying to protect each other from what's going on.
Absolutely.
And in that protecting, we both wind up feeling very much alone.
And you don't maintain that intimate connection that you really need.
Yeah.
That's one of the things actually I've been lecturing on recently, and I'm doing another one later this month, is the intimacy process at when someone is facing both dementia and end of life and afterward, because we start treating the family like caregivers.
Right.
And they're no longer married, and they're no longer a spouse.
Yeah.
And, if I talk about this with some groups and they're medical, they'll say, but why would you even think about intimacy? They've got dementia and things are going on. They're married. They fell in love. They made their vows. They made their life together. They're going to make this journey together. We need to maintain that intimacy, and we need to really develop that connection still so they can talk about what the experience is like. And I use an example when I'm doing that of at the end of life with my wife, Casper. She was bedbound for quite some time because, and Lewy body it's just not pretty at the end for a lot of people, and it wasn't for her. So some of the time she was in the hospital bed up in our room, and while I was gone to work one day, she looked at the nursing staff, who were friends of ours because we both worked for the same hospice. She was, in fact, a hospice nurse.
Oh, God bless her.
And she'd been my first wife's hospice nurse. We were quite the scandal.
Wow.
Yeah. My first wife told me to marry her and told her to marry me. So then she came back. We did get married. We broke the widow rules. And then she ended up with Lewy body. So she's in the hospital bed, and she looks at one of our nurse friends, Christina, and said, there will be a time very soon where I won't be able to cuddle Jill anymore. And we need to snuggle. I need that.
Yeah.
And I got home, and they had the kids go down and get the zip ties from the garage. And I came home, and our hospital bed and our bed had been, like, tied together. It was some kind of, looked like a bad bondage moment, but
I was really resisting.
But it was so that in the bad nights, the hospital bed arm could go up and I could pat it, because Lewy body has a really severe sleep disorder. Robin Williams had it. That's why he was sleeping in a different room.
Yeah.
Because you can hurt somebody, you can break bones, you can cause concussions. And there was a fear factor when that was going whole hog crazy.
Yes.
So I could put that up, I could box her in, we had pillows all around her, but on the good nights, she could slide over, I could slide over, we could hold each other, because we were still married, dementia or not.
Yes.
And she was only 57 when she died, so still very married, right? So we have to look at the family unit. We have to look, if it's a couple, we need to recognize them as a couple.
Yes.
We need to treat the family member doing the support as openly as possible and maintain their relationship in the words we use and the way we deal with them as part of a couple. Because
Yes.
they are. And if it's an adult daughter or son and a parent, there's still a familial relationship, and we still need to maintain that instead of turning them into just some kind of unpaid caregiver.
I'm glad you're saying all this. When I was a hospice chaplain, I did it for about 10 years. These are some of the conversations I would have about being romantic. And it's funny, I had a couple nurses that thought I was just out of my mind. I said, wait a second, at what point did they stop being human beings?
You are the first hospice employee I have ever met who referenced doing that. I'm doing a presentation with a hospice nurse later this month, and when I told her what my part was going to be, she said, I need to go apologize to every hospice family I've ever had. I was so busy taking care of the medical, I didn't even think about it, because they're end of life. Right, they're end of life, they're still married.
Yeah, and I felt that my role as chaplain was to help quality of life. Mm-hmm. And that's part of quality of life. I make a joke about it. And forgive me, listeners, I know I'm going to get some letters on this, but I say, well, you know what? I'm a religious man that believes in the resurrection. You can use Viagra.
That's exactly right.
And the humor opened it up so that they could talk about it, because they had both felt so alone for so long because they were afraid to talk about it.
They wanted to, and nobody would bring it up to them, and they felt it was weird to bring it up themselves.
Exactly.
Especially to the guy with the collar on.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because that just feels weird anyway.
Well,
but
the leash
somebody's got to bring it up.
The leash made me a little nervous too. But they kept threatening me that they're going to change my collar to a shock collar.
Zap.
But humor is so important. And that's why I found, as a chaplain, one of the greatest things I could do for people I went in with was to laugh with them. Look, if they want to hear scripture, I'm happy to read scripture. Some people just want someone who could just be real with them. Mm-hmm. And if you can laugh about it a little bit, you can talk about what's really going on. And I heard more last confessions from people who weren't Catholic or Orthodox, from Buddhists to all of them, because they felt comfortable. And I'm not saying this to pat my back.
You made it safe.
That was the whole point. Was
You
to
made
be
it safe for them.
And what I would do, what we call empathy, is I would ask, what would I want in this position? Now I'm in the position to have to be asking that. Now that I'm going through some of this.
Anybody listening, he's telling you.
Yeah. And if you could have permission to laugh, and I'll tell you where I take that from. And I don't mean to hog the mic right now, but in the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a nun who wasn't an alcoholic but was very involved, Sister Ignatius. She was just a nun with a bad attitude, which made her great for working with drunks. And this is a true story of history. On the unit at St. Charles Hospital, one of the patients was asking Sister Ignatius about another patient about if she was going to release him. He says he's not ready yet. But he quotes the literature. He's really good in group. He's working with others. He's not ready yet. And they went back and forth till finally the guy asked the right question. He says, Sister, why do you say he's not ready yet? And this is what she said. He's not laughed yet. And until you've had that first belly laugh, recovery has not taken place.
You haven't centered yet.
Exactly. And I learned that years ago, but I thought of that as a hospice chaplain. If they haven't laughed, there's been no room for a healing. We're just treating a body, not a person. And hospice is about treating the whole person and the
we're not
family.
reducing their stress. And there's actually now research about this that says that patients and families who find that they have hospice staff who can come in and help them with laughter and some humor, they actually are more open to reaching back to hospice for grief support afterward.
Exactly.
And they feel far more supported. And the widow or widower or family member has a much easier time with the grief process.
Yes.
And it comes from that humor piece, because that's what connects us.
And it's being willing to hurt also.
You got to be right up front, and you can't be a blank. There is no gestalt. There is no blank slate.
That's right.
When you're doing end of life or grief, you have to be able to talk about where you've been, not to make it your story, but to really connect and join.
To let them know you get it.
Right. That's why people find me to do grief work, because I'm very transparent. If you find me on the web, people see my story. They come and I wanted to see you. This is my least favorite, because you're old enough that I can talk to you.
I can hardly wait to get
Thanks.
that old.
I appreciate that. But then they say, but you've been there.
Yes.
You have said goodbye to somebody. You've walked them out,
Yes.
literally. And people who are grieving need to know that you get it. They don't need someone who says, I can't talk about my grief or my experiences. Let's talk about you. Let me leave now.
When I was working with doing the peer supervision we talked about earlier, I went against the literature. I know you find that hard to believe by now, huh?
Oh, never.
And I used to tell them, a therapist needs to be present
And whole.
and whole. One of the things I loved about Carl Rogers is he wasn't afraid to love his patient. And, or as he would say, client. And before I would take a client on in counseling, the question I'd ask myself is, am I capable of loving this person unconditionally? Because if I'm not going to be able to do them a darn bit of good.
Can I sit with them in where they need to be and support them wherever they are?
Amen. Amen. And so, but I operate under my ordination. They can't yank my license as much as some might want to. That was a beautiful thing in California. Business and Professions Code 9808. Ordained clergy can do all forms of therapy. But I say most shouldn't because they're not trained. I'm trained in it. So
And some therapists shouldn't be doing therapy in terms of grief and dementia because they're not trained.
At least not from the therapist's chair.
No.
But we'll couch that issue for now. So to
Yes,
speak.
we will.
That's a little inside humor, folks. So before we go to commercial break, Tell me a little bit about your book that's going on right now, this one that's just come out in March.
Well, when both of my wives were dying, I wrote a blog because I got tired of people asking me how things were going, and I got tired of explaining it and justifying.
Right.
So I wrote a blog, Tell It Like It Is. Some of it was educational. And then as they were dying, I blogged almost every day. So people were with me on that. And then afterward, I did some of the grief stuff too. And when I met my third wife, who was the funeral director for both my first two wives, I keep them close, I've got to tell you.
Well, funeral directors are to die for. Yeah.
That's exactly right. They were afraid for her. And she said, no, I did the death certificates. I know how they died. So she said, we got to do something with the blogs. And I wanted to do a book, but I wanted it to not be autobiographical completely. I wanted
Right.
it to be, here's how I did it, but this is how you do grief when you want to do it your way and you don't want to follow the widow rules, because they
Right.
really suck.
They do.
And this is how we do it, and this is how it works, and this is how you get from the end of life, the dying process, which is spelled out clear as day, and then how to do that grief process
Right.
so that you can come out healthy on the other side.
Right.
And so if you want to choose to love again, you can. I described there being a spectrum. There's Jill on one side who marries the hospice nurse, and then there's Betty White who never remarries again. And everyone's had a good life after that loss.
Yes. Well, you know, we're just coming up on commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk about the difference that we've had in the last 50 years between being able to talk about sex and being able to talk about death, because they've changed roles. And we'll talk more about that when we come back. You're listening to Viewpoint with Father John on KCAA Radio, and my guest is Jill Johnson-Young, and we'll be back in 90 seconds.
The loss of a loved one is one of the most challenging experiences in a person's life. It's hard to know where to turn to make your loved one's final arrangements. Jesse Ruiz at Personal Funeral Planning in Ontario will treat you and your loved one with the respect you deserve. Jesse served in the Marine Corps in Desert Storm and understands what it takes to provide loyal, personalized, and empathetic service to those who need it most. The families of Michael Jackson, Brittany Murphy, Ed McMahon, and many others have trusted Jesse to provide them with the highest level of service and support. To work with Jesse, call 909-762-4027, 909-762-4027, or visit their website, www.4pfp.org. www.4pfp as in personalfuneralplanning.org. Jesse Ruiz and Personal Funeral Planning, veteran-owned and operated, helping you plan a personal, lasting tribute for your loved one. www.4pfp.org.
The Tri-City Shopping Center in Redlands is serving up some really cool ice cream at La Micho Acana. Then get your chocolates and other delights from C's Candies. Moms and future moms who visit the mall can cool off and relax while they get treated like royalty at Shiny Nails or Francis Nails and then pampered at Texture Hair. The Tri-City Center is filled with retailers who care about you. Shop at the Tri-City Center in Redlands and see why they call it the Mall with a Heart.
And welcome back. You're tuned to NBC Radio, KCAA, 1050 AM, 102.3 FM, 106.5 FM, or you can listen from anywhere around this beautiful globe at kcaaradio.com. This is Viewpoint with Father John. I am your host, Father John Reed. Just a couple reminders that our guest has books out. I really want to recommend that the one that just came out is The Rebellious Widow. And we're talking a little bit about what's in there. But also, at the end of the show, we're going to have Jill give some information on how you can get in touch with her. But also, as you know, you can get in touch with me through the Facebook and other such formats. And I'm also happy to put you in touch with Jill.
Thank you.
She's obviously good at what she does, and she came to me highly recommended. I always find it interesting that a couple I marry sends me a grief counselor. But
Right?
it makes me wonder how
I
I
helped
did
with
on
the
the wedding.
funeral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I do a funeral to die for. But it's I started talking before we went to break about the difference between how we deal with death and how we deal with sex and how that's changed over 50 years. At one time, you could speak openly about death. And I've mentioned this on the show a few times. In the Midwest, a lot of houses had a room called the parlor.
Yeah.
And when someone died, the family washed the body, dressed the body, and the funeral director would help set everything up in the family home.
Right.
in
It
the
was a
parlor.
family home set. Yeah.
And people would come in. We used to say, what's the difference between an Irish wake and an Irish wedding? One less drunk. That's,
You can now rent a blow-up Irish pub. I think I'm going to have to start doing that soon.
yeah, there's a joke against you on here. Anyhow, so you're going to give me enough trouble. But anyhow, you could talk about death openly, but you didn't dare talk about sex.
Right. That was completely taboo.
Total taboo. Now, 50 years later, you can't go down the 10 freeway without seeing a gentleman's club or some type of sexual thing. It's all over the television,
everywhere.
radio, but we can't talk about death.
In the middle of a pandemic, we can't talk about death.
Can't talk about death.
And we've made it so sanitized, and it's all come out of the home,
Yeah.
and so we don't talk about it, and people don't know what it's about, and they don't know the dying process.
And we don't know how to allow people to grieve.
No, we don't, because we want to tell them how to do it.
Exactly. And one of the things I say to families almost every funeral I do is, if you don't remember anything else I say, I hope you remember this. It's okay to not be okay.
Absolutely.
And when I did the funerals for family members of mine, I said, I tell people I was fine, but fine stood for frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional.
Mm-hmm. And a
you-
little tired of the relatives, too.
Yeah, and you're going to be fine for a long time. And I tell them, look, there's no such thing as normal grief. But a commonality in grief is a minimum of 3 to 5 years, minimum. And that doesn't mean you're going to be done at 5 years. That means that's where you're going to start realizing, oh, this is grief. And so can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, see, I do grief a little bit differently.
Okay.
And that's just because I'm a solution-focused therapist.
No, that's good.
And what the research says, some of it says, is that especially those who've gone through a really intense, long illness with a spouse.
Right.
Now, this is intimate loss, intimate partner loss. Those folks who have spent that time doing anticipatory grief,
Right.
a la Kubler-Ross, who was wonderful in the anticipatory grief process.
Right.
Not after loss. It doesn't. Stages don't belong after death. Don't do that to people. That's one of my bugaboos. I got to tell you.
No, I got you.
So those people who have spent that time thinking, not only they're taking care of their spouse, but what am I going to do? How am I going to manage my life? Where am I going to go? What do I need to change? Those folks tend to be done with the most intense part of the grief somewhere between 3 and 6 months.
Right.
Now, you're still going to miss them occasionally.
Right.
The problem with that is everybody else who's not that intimate partner is not done at that point because they weren't laying in bed next to them saying goodbye for all those months, right? So I look at grief as being the process where you do the work, you say all the things that you needed to say after the loss if you didn't say them ahead of time. You do all the goodbye work, and then you start to reorganize. And then you come out on the other side, but with permission. And most of it is just semantics. Permission to still say, I miss them occasionally.
Right.
Permission to still have those ugly cries, but I try not to define it as ongoing grief because then everyone around them tells them they still need to be grieving.
Well, exactly. In fact, some of the grief groups I've done in the past is by a few weeks in, I started talking about your new experience with sex.
Right.
Because
It's going to happen,
you
probably.
didn't die with them.
Right.
And when I was doing that at hospice, we had a young widow and widowers class, and this isn't just for young people. That's the big mistake.
It's for everybody.
It is, because I'm going to digress for a second. In hospice, we see a lot of the inside of convalescent homes. Mm-hmm. Sniffs, as we call them.
Yes.
Because they smell so bad.
They do.
But one of the problems they have is the pitter-patter of little feet at night.
Mm-hmm. Because people move around and go visit.
And some of them could still get pregnant. They had some problem with that, but they also had a lot of problem with venereal disease.
Yes, they do.
And
And they have a problem with family members who say, "How dare you?"
Yeah.
It's a normal part of human life and experience.
Thank you. And
Right?
that's why I'm saying, as part of grief process, I've found it, and again, I'm interested in your input in this too, because there's many ways of looking at the same situation. Oftentimes, when people have processed 6 months, year, whatever it is, and they start getting into a relationship, a lot of people get really pissed off.
They're breaking the widow rules.
There we go.
They really are. And there are widower rules, but widowers after a certain age become kind of a hot commodity. And
Okay.
so the rules get pulled back for them, even though they don't want the rules pulled back because they want to be able to decide what they want to do anyway.
Okay.
But for widows, and this is so funny, the week after I was widowed, a good friend of mine, who's also an LCSW, took me out for coffee and she said, "Jill, you need to understand. You're going to start breaking the widow rules and you need to know what they are ahead of time so that you do it someplace else. So you don't smile too much because it makes people upset, but don't look too sad because that makes them feel sad and then you make them feel bad. And don't you dare make changes in your world for at least a year or maybe 2 years or 5 years, depending on who's talking to you.
Yeah.
And you are
I've
not
heard
allowed
this.
to date. So if you're going to even have dinner with a friend, do it in Redlands because I'm in Riverside.
Yeah.
Right? You cannot see anyone because people will come because every town we live in is a small town.
Right.
So I was having dinner with a friend who had also just become a widow because her wife had died by suicide the same month
sorry.
that my wife died. And we were having dinner at a fish marketplace, and all the church ladies walked in.
Ah!
And they're like, cluck, 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 right? Because they do that thing where and who is this? I'm like, this is not dating. This is a friend. And, oh, it's okay, but it's not. So then when I did end up with my second wife, as ordered by my first wife, oh my gosh, people disappeared. Because when you break the rules, they vote with their feet.
I keep hearing from Music Man, pick a little, talk a little, pick a little, talk, cheep, cheep, cheep,
Right.
talk a little.
They all disappeared. And there's a whole lot of people who think they get a vote. The day I got
Yeah.
remarried, I had relatives walk up to me and say, I'm only here to support you. I disagree with you doing this. And I thought, this is not a voting booth.
I had a member of my parish that the way I met the man is I did his wife's funeral. And so when he met somebody else, because he was new to my parish, the rest of people didn't know. And when he told me that they were going to get married, I said, Wayne, that's fabulous. That's great. And I thought it was wonderful because they had that conversation before Linda had died,
Yeah.
that I want you to live life. But if he had been where he had been before, that option might have been taken away from him from peer pressure.
The peer pressure is tremendous.
It is.
It's tremendous. People will tell you what you should do, how you should do it. They will ask questions that are amazingly intrusive
Yes.
and feel like they're deserved an answer. Somebody asked me at dinner the same month that my second wife died, well, did she die in the same room? And did it take the same amount of
Ouch.
time? I'm like, I'm in Coco's. I don't know that I want to talk about this right now.
Yeah.
Right? I'm venturing out for the first time. You need to just back it up a little bit there, girlfriend. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who have a lot of opinions. And if you're going to break the rules, you've got to be prepared to lose people that you weren't expecting to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got to expect to have new people filter in that maybe were old people from long ago and now they've become more prominent in your life.
Right.
Right? And that happens anyway with loss. Everybody loses friends when someone dies.
Right.
And nobody tells anyone that that's going to happen. So you've learned something tonight, folks. You always lose extra people. But if you break the
That's true.
rules, you lose more.
Well, yeah, and then contrast that with our society's 5 rules of society is rule number 1, have nothing wrong with you.
Mm-hmm.
Rule number 2 is if you do have something wrong with you, get over it quick.
Mm-hmm.
Rule number 3 is if you can't get over it quick, pretend that you did.
And
I
smile.
I hate that fake it till you make it.
Right?
4th is if you can't pretend you did, drop out.
Mm-hmm.
And
Quietly.
Number 5 is if you're not going to drop out, at least look ashamed.
Mm-hmm.
And so here you have these 2 sets of rules
Mm-hmm.
that any of us are going to have any insanity we have to break on a daily basis. all these rules, both the ones you're talking about and the ones I'm talking about,
Lots of them.
because you can't put those wires together short out. They don't work. And, I can't believe I'm going to quote him because I'm not a fan. As Dr. Phil would say, how's that working for you?
Right?
Anyone who knows me knows I'm not a fan.
Me either. He's not my favorite anybody.
Yeah.
But we don't talk about death. We don't talk about dying. We don't talk about grief. People don't know what to expect because it's not modeled for them anymore. Kids don't know what to expect because,
Right.
I get phone calls, grandma's dying. Should we tell the kids? Well, I don't know. Are you going to tell them she got on a plane and didn't like him anymore and decided not to ever come back? What? Of course you're going to tell them. And then you're going to bring them to see her. And then you're going to take them to the funeral. And you're going to have them play their drums or their flute or whatever.
Yeah.
Or read a poem. And you're going to make this part of life.
Yes.
Right?
As if kids aren't resilient. And oftentimes, it's like, folks that don't want to tell the kids they're getting divorced. The difference between a divorce and someone dies is at the death, you don't run into them at the supermarket.
Right.
Either way, though, the kids know something has changed.
And kids are good as long as we're concrete and open. That's why I wrote the kids' books that I did. Because
And don't give them more information than they're asking for.
Right. Every kid's book about grief and loss is, and I love Leo Buscaglia, but The Fall of Freddie the Leaf is a leaf dying. It's not a person. It's not a hospital bed. It's not going to a funeral and seeing a casket. So the books are written so kids can really see the stuff because they do well if they've got the information.
Yeah.
Right? So we need to be open with them. My kids were raised, when someone's dying, we go spend time with them.
Yes.
Right? We help with the funeral. We do the whole thing afterward. And in my family, we do really cool funerals. We have like Hawaiian shave ice and things.
Oh, that's cool.
Because you should be able to enjoy yourself and remember them with laughter.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, before the show, you and I were talking about we've both done work in the AIDS community.
Yes.
And with that background, we've both learned of the importance of physical presence. I shared with you that when I was working with Food AIDS Project, I found the most important thing I could do was rub somebody's feet.
And you were famous for that at the Inland AIDS Project. People knew about you.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
Well, and I learned if I cried with them too.
Mm-hmm. Fully present.
Yeah.
Fully joined.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we acknowledge that a griever needs that physical touch, and they need someone, if it's a professional, to join with them and be open, but they also need to be able to tell that professional in the office, you know what, I'm going to get involved with someone. I need to be connected. I need to feel physically close to someone again.
Yes.
I need to have strong arms around me again.
Yeah.
They need to not have the therapist go, are you sure? Isn't it too soon? We need to be fully present and support people.
Yeah.
Likewise, our friends and family need to do that too.
Yeah. And that comes back to can I love them unconditionally?
Right.
And loving someone unconditionally is giving them the right to live their life as they see fit. And
to support them if they make a mistake and not hold it over their head.
yeah, I think that's what 12-steppers have it right. They have a step, 10 step. When you're wrong, you promptly admit it and you move on.
Right.
And I think the worst people about it are we in the church. We're really bad about that. Anything you say can and will be used against you at a convenient time.
Right, and brought up in a sermon.
Yeah. But names have been changed to protect us from a lawsuit.
Right.
So, with all the funerals I do, and we're coming up to our last couple of minutes, 2 minutes here, but the one thing that drives me crazy is when people get up to eulogize somebody and they use it as a time to take everybody's personal life inventory and who should be doing what and to lecture them. And they never say a darn thing about the person in the casket. It's all about what you should be doing as a family and what they would want us to do.
Right. And you should be grateful that they're in a better place.
Oh, God.
Stop it.
Just
stop it.
Real quickly before I go into the last minute, that is a big pet peeve of mine. And I'm just saying this for the record. When my time goes, you better be crying at my funeral. I'm worth a few tears. Then you can laugh.
I want you to be sad, and then I want you to celebrate me.
But I want you to also miss me.
Right.
And that's why I tell people, they may be in a better place, but it's okay to miss them right now.
That's why the movie Coco is the best way to teach adults how to do grief.
I have to go see the movie.
It's great. You can, it's on Netflix, I think, still.
Does it come with a Cocoa cup?
It doesn't, but you could do your own, or your special boss over there might consider making it for you.
She didn't like to be called special.
Renowned.
Renowned. Well, you've been listening to Viewpoint with Father John, and my guest this evening has been Jill Johnson Young. She's at LCSW. She has the book, The Rebellious Widow. I really recommend getting that. I know I'm looking forward to it. And so we'll connect with you on YouTube after this. And, if no one told you this week that they love you, let me be the first. And we'll be back next week. God bless.